The inheritance of the Moonless Wood. The letter arrived on the morning of the first frost, carried by a postman who refused to make eye contact. It bore no return address, only a wax seal pressed in the shape of a tree whose roots reached downward into what looked, if you stared too long, unmistakably like hands. Marcus Vale had never heard of his great-aunt Seraphine. His father never spoke of her. His grandmother in her final years would go pale at the mere mention of the family name and redirect the conversation with the practiced ease of someone who had been doing it for decades. Now, according to this letter, Seraphine was dead at 112 years old, and the Moonless Wood was his. He should have burned the letter. The wood sat at the northernmost edge of the province, where maps grew uncertain and roads dissolved into paths, and paths dissolved into suggestions. The hired driver who brought Marcus to the property line refused to go further. "The wood doesn't like wheels," he said, not meeting Marcus's eyes. "Only feet, and even then, only if it lets you." The cottage at the wood's heart was smaller than he expected, but the shelves lining every wall held hundreds of journals, leather-bound, stamped with dates stretching back 3 centuries. He opened the oldest and found his great-aunt's handwriting, neat, controlled, utterly without fear. "Day 1 of my inheritance," it read. "The wood has accepted me. I have accepted my duty. I will not fail them the way my mother failed me, by never explaining what we are." There was no entry for day 2. The next journal began 40 years later. Marcus read through the night. The candle burned low. Outside, the wood was quiet, a silence so deliberate it pressed against the windows like a held breath. The journals described his ancestors' purpose in careful, clinical language. The wood was a boundary, not between countries, not between seasons, but between what had a right to exist in the world and what did not. Something ancient, the journals called it only the attending, had been held at the wood center since before language had words for what it was. The warden's job was to walk the paths each night, to let the wood know there was still a human presence, a conscious witness keeping the bargain alive. "It is not the trees that hold the attending," his great-aunt had written in her 53rd year. "It is us, our attention, our willingness to see it without flinching. Ignore it, and the boundary weakens. Leave, and it ends." He read that passage 3 times. Then he looked at the door. The first night, Marcus walked the paths with a lantern. The wood made no sound, no wind, no insects, no settling of branches, only silence and his footsteps, and the feeling that something at a great and indefinite depth was watching him with the patient focus of a creature that had waited centuries and learned not to waste its attention. He saw nothing. He felt everything. He returned to the cottage before dawn, unable to explain why his hands were shaking. By the 4th night, he began to hear things, not sounds. The wood remained perfectly silent. What he heard arrived in the space between heartbeats, in the half-second before he completed a thought, impressions, the emotional residue of minds that no longer existed in any form he could name. His great-aunt's journals, he understood now, had been her method of staying human, of holding on to herself in the wood's company. He started his own journal on the 5th day. Months passed. Marcus did not leave. He couldn't, or rather he chose not to, which he suspected amounted to the same thing in a place like this. The village at the road's end brought supplies once a week and asked no questions. They had lived at the edge of the wood for 11 generations and understood, in the bone-deep way of people raised beside a truth they cannot name, that the warden stayed because staying mattered. On a night in deep winter, Marcus walked further than he had before, further than the paths seemed to allow, and found the center of the wood. It was a clearing. In the clearing was nothing, no trees, no snow, no underbrush, just bare earth, and in the middle of that earth, a quality of darkness so complete it had texture. He stood at the edge and looked at it. It looked back, not with eyes, with something that the word attention only approximates, the way the word ocean only approximates standing at the edge of an abyss of salt water that stretches to the curve of the world. He did not flinch. He understood then what the wood was keeping, not a monster. The word was too small, too human, not a god. The word was too large, too flattering, something between and beyond both, something that had existed before the world decided what things were allowed to do. And he understood, standing there with his lantern casting light that stopped precisely at the clearing's edge, that the bargain was not a trap. It was an offer, freely made by the first of his bloodline, to something willing to wait, for a witness, for someone to see it and not run, for someone to say, "I know you are here. I am here too." That is enough. Marcus walked back to the cottage and wrote in his journal until the candle guttered. Then he slept, dreamlessly, for the first time since he had arrived. The wood outside was silent. The attending, in its incomprehensible depth, attended. The boundary held. The world beyond the wood's edge continued, unknowing, with its ordinary terrors and ordinary joys, never understanding what stood between it and the dark. Only a person, only a lantern, only the stubborn human capacity to witness without fleeing. Some inheritances are not given. They are honored. You've been listening to Storytime Scary Dark. If this story kept you company in the dark, like, subscribe, and share it with someone who isn't afraid of the quiet. A new story drops every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday. The dark always has more to tell.